Chapter 4 Invitations. In my dream, it was very dark, and what dim light there was seemed to be radiating from Edith's skin. I couldn't see her face, just her back, as she walked away from me, leaving me in the blackness. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't catch up to her. No matter how loud I called, she never turned. I got more and more frantic to get to her until that anxiety woke me. It was the middle of the night, but I couldn't sleep again for what seemed like a very long time. And after that, she was in my dreams nearly every night, but always on the edges, never within reach. The month that followed the accident was an uneasy, tense, and at first embarrassing. I found myself at the center of attention for the rest of the week, which really sucked. Taylor Crowley was super annoying, following me around, coming up with different hypothetical ways to make it up to me. I tried to convince her that what I wanted more than anything else was for her to forget about it, especially since nothing had actually happened to me. But she wouldn't give up. She found me between classes and sat at our now crowded lunch table. Michaela and Erica didn't seem to like that. They flashed more side eye at her than they did at each other, which made me worried that I had gained another unwelcome fan. Like being into the new kid was the latest fad. No one was worried about Edith. No one followed her around or asked her for eyewitness and account. I always included her in my version. She was the hero. She had pulled me out of the way and nearly had been crushed too. But all anyone ever said was that they hadn't even realized she was there until the van was pulled away. I wondered a lot about why no one else seemed to notice her. Sorry, kind of got lost there. Noticed her standing so far away by her car before she was suddenly and impossibly saving my life. There was only one solution that I could think of, and I didn't like it. It had to be because no one else was so aware of Edith. No one watched her the way I did. It was pathetic and kind of stalkerish. People avoided Edith the same way they usually did. The Cullens and the Hales sat at the same table they always sat at, not eating, talking, only to each other. None of them ever glanced my way anymore. When Edith sat beside me in class, it was as far away as possible, like usual. She seemed totally unaware that I was sitting there next to her, like my seat was empty. Only now and then, when her fists would suddenly ball up, skin stretched even whiter over her knuckles, did I wonder if she wasn't as entirely oblivious as she seemed. I wanted very much to continue our conversation from the hospital hallway, and the day after the accident I tried. She'd been so furious when we talked before, and even though I really wanted to know what had actually happened, and I thought I deserved the truth, I also knew I had been pretty pushy, considering that she had just saved my life and all. I didn't think I'd thanked her properly. She was already in her chair when I got to biology. She didn't turn when I sat down. She kept staring straight ahead. She showed no sign that she knew I was there. "Hey, Edith?" I said. She turned her head half an inch toward me, but her eyes stayed focused on the blackboard. She gave me one little half nod, then turned her face away from me. And that was the last contact I'd had with her, though she was there a foot away from me every day. I watched her sometimes, unable to stop myself, always from a distance, though, in the cafeteria or parking lot. I watched her as golden eyes grew noticeably darker day by day. Then abruptly, they were honey-colored again, and the slow progression toward black would start over. But in class, I gave no more notice that she existed than she showed towards me. It was miserable. And the dreams continued. She wished she hadn't pushed me out of the way of Taylor's van. I couldn't think of any other explanation. Since she'd obviously preferred me dead, she was pretending that I was. Despite my outright lies, the tone of my emails got my mom worked up. She called a few times demanding to know if I was okay. I tried to convince her it was just the rain that had me down. Michaela at least was pleased by the obvious coolness between my lab partner and me. I guess she'd been worried that the shared trauma would have bonded us or something. She got more confident sitting at the edge of my table to talk before biology class started and ignoring Edith as completely as Edith ignored us. The snow washed away for good after that one dangerously icy day. Michaela complained that she'd never got to stage her big snowball fight, but she was happy that the beach trip would soon be possible. The rain continued heavily, though, and the weeks passed. I hadn't really been aware of how much time was passing. Most days looked the same: gray, green, and more gray. My stepdad had always complained that Phoenix didn't have seasons, but as far as I could tell, Forks was much worse. I had no idea spring was anywhere near appearing until I was walking to the cafeteria with Jeremy one rainy morning. "Hey, Bo?" he asked. I wanted to hurry out of the rain, but Jeremy was barely shuffling forward. I slowed my pace to match his. "What's up, Jeremy?" "I was just wondering if anyone's asked you to the spring dance yet. You know, it's girls' choice." "Oh, um, no." "Huh? Do you want, I mean, do you think Michaela will ask you?" "I hope not," I said, maybe a little too fast. He looked up at me surprised. "Why not?" "I don't do dances." "Oh." We shuffled forward a minute in silence. He was thoughtful. I was impatient to get out of the drizzle. "Do you mind if I tell her that?" he asked. "No, that's probably a good idea. I don't want to have to tell anyone no if I don't have to." "Okay. When's the dance again?" We were close to the cafeteria now. He pointed to a bright yellow poster advertising the dance. I'd never noticed it before, but it was curling around the edges, a little washed out. It had been up for a while. "A week from Saturday," he said. I was pretty sure Jeremy had already said something when, the next morning, Michaela was not her usual bubbly self in English. At lunch, she sat away from both Jeremy and me, and she didn't say much to anyone. She stayed quiet as she walked with me to biology, but she came over like usual to sit at the edge of my lab table. As always, I was too aware of Edith sitting close enough to touch, but still so far away she might as well have been a product of my imagination. "So," Michaela said, looking at the floor instead of at me, "Jeremy said you don't do dances?" "Yeah, that's true." She looked at me then, her expression hurt and a little angry. I hadn't even told her no yet, and I already felt guilty. "Oh," she said. "I thought maybe he was making it up." Sorry, no." "Why would he make up a story like that?" She frowned. "I think he wants me to ask him." I forced a smile. "You should. Jeremy's great." She shrugged. "I guess." Then she took a deep breath and looked at me straight in the eye with a quick, nervous smile. "Would this I don't dance thing change if I was the one asking you to go?" From the corner of my eye, I saw Edith's head suddenly tilt in my direction, like she was listening to my answer, too. It took me a little too long to respond. I still felt guilty, but mostly distracted. Was Edith listening? Um, Sorry, again." Michaela's face fell. "Would Would it change if someone else asked you? Did Edith see how Michaela's eyes flickered in her direction? Uh, no. It's a moot point. Anyway, I'm gonna be in Seattle that day. I needed to get out of town. 2 Saturdays from now was the perfect time to go. Does it have to be that week? Michaela asked. Yeah, but don't worry about me. You should take Jeremy. He's much more fun than I am. Yeah, I guess, she mumbled, and she turned to walk back to her seat. I watched her shoulders slump forward, and I felt horrible. I closed my eyes and pushed my fingers against my temples, trying to force Michaela's dejected posture out of my head. Mrs. Banner started talking. I sighed and opened my eyes. Edith was staring straight at me, that familiar expression of frustration even more obvious now in her black eyes. I stared back, surprised and expecting her to look away. She didn't. Her eyes kept boring into mine like she was trying to find something really important inside them. I continued to stare also, totally unable to break the connection. Even if I wanted to, my hands started to shake. Miss Cullen, the teacher called, looking for the answer to some question I hadn't heard. The Krebs cycle, Edith answered, seeming reluctant as she turned to look at Mrs. Banner. I put my head down, pretending to stare at my book, as soon as her eyes released me. It bothered me, the rush of emotion pulsing through me, just because she happened to look at me for the first time in 6 weeks. It wasn't normal. It was actually pretty pathetic, and probably more than that, unhealthy. I tried hard not to be aware of her for the rest of the class. Or since that was impossible, at least not to let her know that I was aware of her. When the bell finally rang, I turned away from her to stack up my books, expecting her to rush out as usual. Bo? Her voice shouldn't sound so familiar. Like I'd been hearing it all my life instead of just an hour here and there a few weeks ago. I turned slowly toward her, not wanting to feel what I knew I would feel when I looked at her too perfect face. I'm sure my expression was guarded. Hers was unreadable. She didn't say anything. Yes? I asked. She just looked at me. So, um, are you or are you not talking to me again? Not, she said, but her lips curled into a smile, her dimples flashing. Okay. I looked away, down at my hands, then over toward the chalkboard. It was hard to concentrate when I looked at her, and this conversation wasn't making much sense. I'm sorry, she said, and there was no joke in her voice now. I'm being very rude, I know, but it's better this way, really. I looked at her again. Expression was totally serious now. I don't know what you mean. It's better if we're not friends, she explained. Trust me. My eyes narrowed. I'd heard that one before. She seemed surprised by my reaction. What are you thinking? She asked. I guess that it's too bad you didn't figure this out earlier. Saved yourself the regret. Regret? My answer seemed to have caught her off guard. Regret for what? For not letting Taylor's van crush me when it had the chance. She looked completely shocked. She stared at me for a minute, wide eyed, and then when she finally spoke, she almost sounded mad. You think I regret saving your life? The words were quiet, just under her breath, but still pretty intense. I glanced quickly towards the front of the room where a couple of kids were still lingering. I caught one of them looking at us. He looked away, and I turned back to Edith. Yeah, I said just as quietly. I mean, what else? Seems kinda obvious. She made the strangest sound. She exhaled through her teeth, and it was like a hiss. She looked mad. You're an idiot, she told me. Well, that was my limit. It was bad enough that I was so fixated on this girl, bad enough that I thought about her all the time, dreamed about her every night. I didn't need to sit here like a moron, like the moron she thought I was, and just stare while she insulted me. I grabbed my books and lurched out of my chair, knowing all the while that she was right. I was an idiot because I wanted to stay, even if all I got to hear was more abuse from her. I needed to get out of the room as fast as possible, so of course, I tripped over the threshold and half fell through the doorway, my books scattering across the sidewalk. I stood there for a second, my eyes